For more than 30 years, this collection of high-tech hardware has dominated the North Cornwall skyline. It's so big, you can see it for miles. It's protected by very tight security. Yet unless you're one of a handful of people cleared to know the government's most sensitive secrets, you probably don't know what they do here, how they do it, who they do it for, or how it affects you. One thing, though, seems certain. These dishes are pointing at the sky.
2, unité, feu.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. America is today the strongest, the most influential, and most productive nation in the world. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
200 jobs are being axed at British Aerospace in Plymouth.
I used to work for Rolls-Royce in Bristol as a recruitment manager until 1993 when I was selected in what I believe was the first compulsory redundancy. It was frustrating because I just felt that I could have done a good job for them.
Je suis sur Toulouse. Mon job, c'est un préparateur en électricité. Voilà. Et le chômage technique, on a eu du chômage technique en 93 et 95. Donc bon, ça a été une période quand même qui a été difficile à vivre.
The government announced plans to turn the former wartime Cleve Army camp into a satellite station in 1967. Cornwall County Council raised no objection.
15 seconds in, we're at 342,000 now, 500.
I'll give you some more information. I think you have enough to be going on with.
As the journalist Duncan Campbell demonstrated for a French television crew, intercepting satellite communications is easy. Unauthorised interception is against the law, but Morwenstow is listening 24 hours a day. Inside, the spy station resembles a hyper-modern telephone exchange, intercepting phone, telex, fax and email traffic all over Europe and the Indian subcontinent.
After the war, these 5 countries, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Great Britain, all agreed to eavesdrop on various parts of the world. Great Britain would eavesdrop on a lot of European communications. And then the United States, with bases around the world, could eavesdrop on a lot of other locations.
The Morwenstow spy station was commissioned by former GCHQ director Sir Leonard Hooper. He was the boss from 1965 to 73. But secret United States government documents confirm that Britain and America worked together to expand their electronic eavesdropping worldwide.
Clearly, it was a bit an American project because the initial site was manned or set up by the Americans, who we believe paid most of the money anyway. And then once it was set up, GCHQ staff moved in and operated the place.
In 1969, Hooper wrote to the director of the United States National Security Agency, Lieutenant General Pat Carter. Hooper's letter makes it clear that the NSA was instrumental in developing the new station in Cornwall. Hooper actually suggested calling the first aerials Pat and Louis in honour of the NSA director and his deputy.
This place is called Waihopai. It's in the Marlborough, in the South Island of New Zealand, this dry valley. Its job is to be one of a series of facilities around the world which are tapping into satellites and undersea cables. This station is really like a sister to Morwenstow. They're on opposite sides of the world, but their equipment and their functions and their manuals and their target lists will be almost identical.
America used its space-age spying technology to support its troops in Vietnam. But as the anti-war movement grew in strength at home, the spies had to find new targets.
Through a project called Minaret, they targeted particular people, like Jane Fonda, who was an anti-war protester, anti-Vietnam War protester.
Teach the people that there is a difference between us and Richard Nixon.
So they targeted various people, and they eavesdropped on their communications totally illegally.
Most people on this side of the world have been upset for many years about the Indonesian invasion and then possession of East Timor. During that period, our spy agencies were helping spy on East Timor, but they were not doing it under directions from the New Zealand government. They were doing it as a favour for Australia, because East Timor within that Western Alliance is part of the Australian domain. And we were helping spy on the East Timor people, giving it to Australia, and the Australian intelligence forces were cooperating with the Indonesian military. Now that makes me sick.
In the early 1980s, Morwenstow became a target for peace protesters. In 1984, the government banned Morwenstow's trade unions.
Well, there was enormous support around the country for the workers at GCHQ. It was generally thought to be a very bad thing that civil rights were taken away from civil servants.
One of the Morwenstow workers, radio operator Alan Rowlands, was sacked for refusing to leave the union. The end of the Cold War forced the intelligence services to find new targets.
A number of years ago, our fishing limit was 12 miles out from Canadian shores, and we had a number of foreign vessels off the Grand Banks that were depleting our fish stock. And as a result of all the intelligence we provided our Department of Fisheries here in Canada, our fishing limit was moved from 12 miles out to 200 miles. A classic example of CSE doing a very good job getting something done and getting a very positive result from it.
In 1995, the collection and distribution of this electronic intelligence became entirely automatic.
Echelon itself is just a code name for basically a computer system, but it's become a generic name for NSA's worldwide eavesdropping on private and commercial communications.
I would say 99% of the collected material goes to ground. It's garbage. It's just deleted. Everything that's heard, you collect. But you need supercomputers to sort it out, and that's when it gets a little complicated.
A huge part of the developed world's economy today depends on the manufacture and sale of military equipment. Competition for orders is extremely tough. The temptation to spy on commercial rivals is irresistible.
Well, NSA, CIA, and the rest of the American intelligence community collects about 95% of its intelligence related to economic matters from open sources, newspapers, radio broadcasts, and the like. About 5% of our collection of economic intelligence is secret intelligence, and that's almost all related to collecting on companies or governments that are engaged in bribery.
But one man's bribe is another man's commission. For decades in Europe, it's been normal practice. Not only lawful, in France, it's even tax deductible.
suis rentrée dans une grande entreprise qui s'appelait à l'époque C2I, qui par la suite est devenue Thomson CSF. Bon, j'étais très contente de travailler dans cette entreprise qui avait beaucoup d'avantages sociaux. Le travail était très intéressant. Mais malheureusement, en octobre 2000, nous annonçait la fermeture de l'usine.
Mais les mêmes mécanismes se mettent en place, c'est-à-dire l'espionnage du temps de la guerre froide. Eh bien, il existe toujours d'ailleurs, on le voit bien avec l'histoire de la Chine et tout ça. Mais il existe de plus en plus, bien entendu, d'une façon encore plus importante sur le domaine commercial et économique, bien entendu.
It's impossible to be sure about why any particular company shed workers at any particular time. But the admission by the former director of the CIA that America does spy on Europe for commercial reasons must have one inevitable side effect. People in Europe lose their jobs. And that poses a thorny question. Where precisely is Morwenstow? For most of the past 30 years, the 180 or so people at Morwenstow have been listening particularly hard to what goes on over the water in Ireland. Yet now, some people are asking whether all this extremely expensive eavesdropping produces any intelligence of real value.
I first realised how serious the whole situation was in relation to the security services, because I phoned John Major towards the end of August, day or almost 2 days before the ceasefire of the 31st of August, to tell him that it was coming from a ceasefire from the IRA and that the loyalist ceasefire would follow 6 weeks later. His immediate response was, well, my advice, latest report from my security services is that things are going in the opposite direction. Well, of course, we now know that's not what happened. The ceasefire did come on stream on the 31st of August. So quite clearly, the security services were distinctively unhelpful in that situation.
Others have also claimed that bugging actually undermines the peace process.
And will the person who sanctioned this own up to it? And if they weren't sanctioned, who then has control? Whether it be British military intelligence or RUC intelligence or whoever's involved, who has control of the securities in this situation?
That the security forces for the last 30 years have taken too much of a grip of the situation, the political situation in Northern Ireland. I've always believed that as if security forces took their fingers out of the pie, so to speak, and leave it to the politicians, I don't think that the troubles would have lasted 30 years.
Some terrorist groups oppose the peace process, but Morwenstow has so far failed to catch them.
All around the world, bases like this are justified by terrorism. But the interesting thing I found when I interviewed the people who worked here and who used the intelligence in the government is that there was not a single example of it actually being used against terrorism. Or rather, there was only one example, and that's when the French came to New Zealand and blew up the Rainbow Warrior, the Greenpeace ship here. Terrorism is an excuse. It's a official line which is used to justify much seedier activities, which is spying on neighbours, trading partners, allies, spying on human rights groups, the British GCHQ has done, spying on Greenpeace, things which wouldn't look so good in the press release. Much easier to talk about terrorists.
People say that NSA can listen to everyone everywhere at all times. Well, it's nonsense. They can't even listen to their most important targets all the time. They also missed the attack on the USS Cole. I mean, here's a terrorist attack in the Middle East on a U.S. naval warship, ended up killing 17 people, and practically sinking a U.S. Navy ship, and they never had indications of that.
Terrorists often communicate electronically very little. If one is going to penetrate a terrorist operation and find out when it's going to commit a terrorist act, it's almost certainly only going to be done with spies. Electronics are important and useful, but they certainly won't do the whole job.
Half a year I spent the time looking for another job, applying to advertisements, etc. But that was a nasty experience because I felt that the possible employers were not waiting for older people.
When the company stopped, I was in 1996. I was 57 years old, and yeah, that's a moment not to find another job so easily.
12 months ago, the European Parliament set up an inquiry into allegations that America was stealing European jobs.
Dass dieses Thema so bald wie möglich beendet wird. Und zwar in der Art, dass die Amerikaner sich zurückziehen. Ganz konkret. Sie haben hier in Europa nichts verloren in der Beziehung. Sie betreiben Wirtschaftsspionage, wie sie es selbst anderen Leuten, anderen Staaten vorwerfen. Und genauso machen sie das in Europa und das hat nicht stattzufinden.
Ich habe 25 Jahre in der Luftfahrtindustrie als Konstrukteur gearbeitet bei der Firma DASA, vormals MBB. Aber 1994 kam das Ende. Da musste ich aufgrund der Umstrukturierung in der Luftfahrtindustrie meinen Job aufgeben.
Je sais qu'en Angleterre, il y a des grandes antennes, des grandes oreilles qui coûtent tout. Et nous savons tous que la CIA, avant qui s'occupait du KGB, maintenant s'occupe de l'industrie européenne. Et ce qu'on aimerait bien, c'est que les Américains restent chez eux et qu'on travaille mais en partenariat sincère et loyal. Mais il ne faudrait pas que les Américains essayent de dominer le monde à tous les niveaux.
I went to Angola earlier this year in January with the British Red Cross, a country where there are 15 million landmines in a population, ladies and gentlemen, of 10 million, with a desire of drawing world attention to this vital but hitherto largely neglected issue.
Princess Diana was targeted by the NSA. They have admitted to that. I think they have admitted to having some 25,000 pages of intelligence on the Princess Diana. The way the system works is you don't necessarily target an individual. You target a subject, you target a phone number, you target a fax number. Perhaps Princess Diana would have been more of an interest to the people in the UK than they would have been to the States. And helping your fellow workers in this group of 5 that we are, it's a very common thing. So if the Brits couldn't target Princess Diana legally, then the NSA could.
The message from Morwenstow is simple. Trust no one.
The Margaret Thatcher case is a good example of how these organizations help each other. It would have been very illegal for the British GCHQ to listen to the communications of 2 of Margaret Thatcher's ministers who she thought perhaps were not really in her court. So the GCHQ, the British counterpart of the CSE, came to us and asked us if we could go to London and listen to the communications of these 2 ministers, because Margaret Thatcher wanted to know not what they were saying, but what they were thinking. So we did that. We went to London and we did that work for the GCHQ. We were successful in hearing the communications of these 2 ministers, and we just passed these audio tapes on to the GCHQ, and what they did with them, we have no idea.
And this comes from the former director of the National Security Agency.
The European Parliament has spent a year investigating Echelon. Its conclusions are political dynamite.
England's in a very difficult position. You know, eventually it may come to the European community saying, you know, decide what you want to do. Decide you want to be partners with the U.S. in this Echelon system, or you want to become, you know, full partners in the European community, but you can't do both.
The European Parliament's Echelon Committee has until tonight to amend its draft report. It claims the spying at Morwenstow breaches the European Human Rights Convention.
The European Parliament will be the first official institution recognizing the existence of Echelon. We know there are 5 countries, the United States of America, the UK, Australia, Canada and New Zealand, who share intelligence information, and they operate a global world network.
The committee reports numerous examples where circumstantial evidence suggests Europe lost jobs because of industrial espionage.
If an enterprise knows that it runs a risk, that its communication, its international communication is intercepted, it must protect its communication.
The report says Morwenstow works strictly on instructions from the United States, sending raw intelligence straight to America. The committee is due to debate the political implications of this next week.
While these systems are completely secret, you can have a foreign policy and a secret policy which are out of sync with each other. And that's what Britain has now. Publicly, Britain is part of Europe. Privately, it's a US satellite off the side of Europe spying on them and serving foreign interests. And once these things are revealed, it might not happen today, but eventually Britain has to make a choice which side it's on.
The charges against Morwenstow raised by the European Parliament's report are serious and substantial. We invited GCHQ to provide someone to be interviewed on this programme. GCHQ declined that invitation.
Madam Speaker, I never comment on security allegations. I do not intend to do so now.
GCHQ has given us a 6-paragraph statement insisting the work done here is not only legal, but is actually supervised by government ministers. It says the base does help combat terrorism and dismisses as fanciful claims that it's engaged in commercial espionage. But with the European Parliament being urged to believe quite the opposite, the stage is now set for a huge intercontinental political punch-up, with this sleepy little part of North Cornwall stuck right in the middle. Good night.
Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite. It is the task of statesmanship to mold, to balance, and to integrate these and other forces, new and old, within the principles of our democratic system, ever aiming toward the supreme goals of our free society.